We always have freedom over two things. And really, those are the only two things we ever do: our attitude and our action. Hello and welcome to the Business of Happiness podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Tarryn MacCarthy, and today's going to be a great day. Viktor Frankl once said, "Everything can be taken from a man but one thing. The last of human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way." The truth is that your freedom is your choice, and your imprisonment is your choice too. Wow. You know, this past weekend, we celebrated the 4th of July here in America. And I always contemplate around the 4th, what is freedom? Why do we all crave it? And what is freedom? And it's fascinating because it's our greatest sense of unhappiness when we think that we've lost freedom, when we think that we are trapped or controlled or manipulated or limited. That's the very source of unhappiness. And you know, when I ask clients or I speak to large audiences and I do this exercise, it's one of my favorite exercises actually, when we're talking about happiness and how to redefine success for yourself. I have my clients close their eyes and remember a time when they felt most happy. Doesn't have to be the most happy, but just a time where they felt just so happy and free and grateful and just lit up. And I have them imagine where they were, what they were doing, the smells around them, the sights around them, who was around them, where they were. I have them put themselves right back in that place. And then I have them ask themselves a series of questions, most notably, what are you doing? So trying to kind of find that source of happiness for you as an individual, not defined by what someone else says happiness is or success is. And what's really interesting is when I ask, what was the environment? What were you doing? It's always centered around a sense of freedom. Freedom seems to be the very source of our happiness. And it's all about your perception of being free, right? Because you can be in any situation and feel like you're not in control or out of control or someone else has control over the situation. But when we feel most happy is when we feel like we're making choices that are up to us. And the fascinating thing is you always get to choose two things: your attitude and your action. And it's the two freedoms that we frequently forget. How many times have you heard yourself say, why is this happening to me? Why are you doing this to me? Or this is ruining my day. We're always giving away that power to somebody or something else. Most notably, the rain. This weekend, there was rain all 4th of July weekend long. And here in America, we love to do things outside on 4th of July. We like to be on the water and boating and shooting fireworks and hot dogs and hamburgers outside. We imagine hot weather. And how many times this weekend I heard, why is this happening? This is ruining 4th of July. And what's fascinating is that attitude is a choice, always. And so I submit that freedom actually is a choice. We get to choose our freedom in any moment. And the choice is always up to us. And just as freedom is a choice, so is imprisonment. The quote that I read at the top of this episode by Viktor Frankl is so powerful because he says to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way is the definition of freedom. And it's such a powerful quote, not just because of what he says, but because of who Viktor Frankl was. And if you don't know, he was a very famous neurologist, but he was also a very famous Holocaust survivor. Can you imagine that? This quote coming from a Holocaust survivor. The truth is that you do have freedom of choice in your attitude. But you only have that freedom if you choose to take it. You can choose in any moment to feel like something else is controlling you. Even we say our bodies, oh, my body, my genetics, this is just who I am. I don't have the same ability to choose happiness as you do, or I don't think that way, or my body doesn't respond that way. We're always giving our freedoms away. This weekend, I also happened to start listening to a phenomenal new book I highly recommend. Shout out to this incredible Michelle Gielan. She wrote a book called Broadcasting Happiness. And Michelle Gielan was a journalist, a very accomplished journalist, and she was working on a very high level reporting and on the air all the time. And she opens her book with this fascinating scene where she is in Chicago and she's reporting on a murder, reporting on a shooting. And she finds herself in a church mourning with this family of an 11-year-old girl who was shot at her birthday party by a stray bullet. And it was her birthday party and her life was taken from her. And the reason why this was such an important news story is because it was one in a string of drive-by shootings. So really this community in Chicago was being extremely negatively impacted by the events of its reality, of what was happening in the community. And so when Michelle Gielan went in, she knew this would be a sensationalist reporting, and she knew what that looked like in terms of the algorithm for reporting, and she knew how much press was going to be received and how this story would really be a big story because it was speaking to our greatest fears. Could this happen to me? Isn't this terrible that this community is spinning out of control? And then there's always the innocence of an 11-year-old losing her life, and the fear that evokes in all of us, that life is fragile. Could it be so fragile? And the, how unfair that seems. That was her birthday party. And on that day, her life was taken by a senseless act. And how negatively this family was going to be impacted. If you're listening to this podcast, chances are you didn't get into business to be miserable. The problem is that people feel that if their business gets busier, if they start becoming more successful, that happiness will eventually set in. But it can actually get worse. This is why I created the Business of Happiness Prosperity Coaching. In this one-on-one coaching, we look at how to redefine success on your terms and re-find the joy and the passion in your dream. Visit me at thebizofhappiness.com and become the happiest business owner you know. And so Michelle found herself in this church, and she looked around her and noticed the entire community being there for this family. She noticed a difference from what she thought when she came in. She saw support. She saw love. She saw community. She saw a wellspring of a new attitude of change, of people getting courage to make a change in their community, to make a change in their world, of people being galvanized to find a new way. And in her book, Broadcasting Happiness, Michelle talks about this choice she made in that moment to see things differently. She, in that moment, took that old perception, that old attitude she had of fear and anxiety and, kind of doom, a doom and gloom attitude. And she, in one moment, chose to change her story and to broadcast it differently, and to rather see this as a community of support and this incredible opportunity to find, even in the community that's having the most suffering, that's having the most pain, so much opportunity for growth and change. And looked at it as an example of how, even when we're feeling at our lowest, when the absolute worst can happen, we get to choose an attitude. We get to choose an attitude of victimization, or we get to choose an attitude of courage and growth and determination to see a new world. That attitude is our choice. And it's so true for us in every single day, in every moment of our lives. When you wake up in the morning and it's pouring outside, as it did this 4th of July, you can choose to see it as an opportunity or to see it as an imprisonment. Oh, now, what has the weather done to me? That's such a common phrase. This is ruining my day. This is ruining my weekend. This is ruining 4th of July. Or we get to choose a new attitude. And the truth is, we always have choice and we always have freedom over two things. And really, those are the only two things we ever do: our attitude and our action. We get to choose our attitude in any moment. And so often we get pushed down a trajectory line of thought, right? Has this ever happened to you where you find yourself just spinning already, and with almost seemingly out of your control, you got down a line of thought? This happened to me this weekend where I was having a conversation with my mom and I felt just getting angry. I was welling up with anger. Not at my mom, about the situation, just what we were talking about. And I noticed that I was beginning to interrupt her. I was cutting her off. I was getting more and more heated. And I realized that it didn't feel good. I wanted to be with my mom. I wanted to have this conversation. I wanted to learn from her. I wanted to have a conversation where we shared information. I didn't want this feeling of anger to be burning up inside of me. And in a moment, I stepped aside outside of it and I thought, how can I choose to see this differently? And it's interesting because our emotions tell us things that aren't always true. Your thoughts are not always true. We tell ourselves that our thoughts are true. You know, there's that famous quote, "I think, therefore I am," but actually, it's not the thought process that makes us who we are. Your thoughts are sometimes just random events. Your thoughts are sometimes popping into your head, but they don't have to define who you are. And they never have to define your day or your happiness. And you actually have enormous freedom of choice. One of my favorite techniques is to ask myself, how can I choose to see this differently? So in that moment, I said to myself, I choose to see this differently. I choose to see that I'm getting angry over something because of a perception I have. I've told myself that this has been happening to me and I have made poor choices, or other people have forced me to make poor choices. And then I suddenly saw, wow, I can learn from this. Isn't it fascinating that it's getting me so riled up? And in that moment, I saw it completely differently. And I could let the anger dissipate, and I could let my mom speak and just hear her and step outside of my own preconceived notions of what the situation was and see it differently. And we never have to be controlled by our emotions. And, I think in the past, I've often felt afraid because I thought, oh my gosh, does that mean that's who I am? I wish I was more patient. I wish I was the kind of person that was more patient and didn't feel run by my emotions or by my experiences. And the truth is, we always have that freedom of choice. In fact, those are the only things we have freedom over, is our attitude and our actions. So in any moment, you can take a step back and say, I choose to see this differently, and then I choose to act differently. I choose to, in that example with my mom, just sit back and be quiet and hear her for a moment and let her speak. Or I choose to take action on a situation that I've been inactive on. That's another way to find happiness. And I ask you to ask yourself this question: is there something that you've just been allowing to happen to you and just felt like a victim and like you have no control? And if you change the way you look at it, if you change your attitude about it, could you choose a new action? And this freedom gives us opportunity to choose again and to choose again. And really, there's so few things in our life that we can make mistakes on. But our attitude is always our choice. And that's the truth. And so I ask you, imagine the next time you find yourself feeling trapped or victimized, or feeling like something's happening to you, or even like your thoughts are happening to you, like you've been set on a trajectory of an emotion and you can't get out of it. Imagine being able to just pause in the moment and say to yourself, I choose to see this differently. Imagine if your new choice in attitude can be the insight to the freedom you actually have, the freedom you own, in fact, the only freedom you have. And that is in your own choice of how you see something in terms of your perception. And then your freedom of your own action. Acknowledging that no one is controlling your actions. And that anytime you say that, ask yourself, is that really true? Your freedom is your choice. And your imprisonment is your choice too. Wishing you a spectacular day. Bye-bye.